Welcome back to Metal Bent Chronicles, where metal lives. That is right. And you know what? We got another contest entry here today on this Friday, man. How about that? October 19th, 2023. Years flying by. Anyways, yes, trying to get better at these contest entries. I know it's impossible to do every one of them, but I figured I'd do this one. I've known this guy now probably for close to a year. And I'm talking about Rick, the Dreadful Minutes. How I met Rick was actually through Jeff over at Gas Mask Hand Grenades. It's in one of Jeff's live streams. I've seen him. And ever since then, Rick's been really cool towards me. He always says hi to me, greets me if I'm in another live stream. Be it Heavy Metallurgy, if I'm in there watching their stream, he'll always greet me. If I'm watching Jeff's streams, Gas Mask, Hand Grenades, he always greets me. Really, really good guy. A definitely an awesome member of our great metal community and the vinyl community, the VC here on YouTube. An excellent member. Does a great job with his videos. Very good at thumbnails, very good at editing. Definitely better than me when it comes to editing, that's for sure. Does an excellent job on his channel. So yeah, man, we're going to do this contest entry. And, well, so the topic is Dreadful's Identity in Crisis. 600 subscriber contest entry. And basically, I guess what it is, you pick out CDs, albums, vinyls, cassettes, whatever. Well, anyways, you pick out a band, an artist, an album that you identify with, or what your channel can identify with. And I went overboard with this. Holy cow, did I go overboard. I picked over 50 freaking CDs here, a couple cassettes too. I couldn't stop picking. I had to stop myself. I just kept thinking of stuff when I was randomly going through my CD collection, because anything in my collection I could really identify with, as far as me goes, as far as my YouTube channel goes. But I picked out 50 good ones. So basically what we're going to do, I don't want to make this an overly long video. So what we're going to do right now is we're going to go back to the roots, the beginnings. Little Metal Ben. How did Metal Ben get into metal, or how did Metal Ben get introduced to metal? So I pulled out, a few early ones I can remember from my young childhood. I'm talking over 40 years ago, roughly around 1982, 1983 is when I got exposed to like harder rock music, heavy metal, early heavy metal, which a lot of people would deem hard rock nowadays. So here we go. I mean, these are obvious ones. Definitely a beginner's guide to hard rock and heavy metal here for sure, like it was with me. So yeah, here's some early ones I remember. Me and my cousin were really into Van Halen growing up. We loved Eddie Van Halen. We thought he was the greatest guitar player on the planet. So naturally, I mean, the first one I think I actually remember hearing was probably 1984. Like in its entirety, but even though at the time I still remember hearing tracks like Running with the Devil, Ain't Talking About Love, tracks like that, Dance the Night Away, either or. The obvious, the first Van Halen album. Definitely identifies with me as a little kid, growing up, getting exposed to hard rock heavy metal at a young age. So that's one, Don't want to spend too much time on these, because if you're a music fan, you know these albums I'm about to show. First one I ever owned on cassette tape, and wow. I was at my grandparents' property when I was little, and I found this cassette laying along the road, and I picked it up and I kept it. Unfortunately, I no longer have it. I was probably like 7 years old when I found this cassette just laying along the road, and I'm like, AC/DC. I knew who AC/DC was too. My cousin had exposed me to AC/DC too. Back in Black. First AC/DC album I ever owned and heard. Roughly around 1985. I'm going to say around 84 or 85 I first heard this. Don't listen to it a lot these days because it's been so outplayed, but it's still a damn good album. And it's one of those early childhood memories for me. Another one, Quiet Riot and Mental Health. Don't got to spend much time with this. I remember seeing the video to Come On, Feel the Noise and Bang Your Heads on MTV back in the early days. I'm talking around 1983, when MTV was fairly new. I was only 4 years old, but I kind of remember seeing those videos on MTV in the early days. Now, this one right here is probably the first full album I can remember hearing when it comes to early heavy metal. Now, this would not be called heavy metal by today's standards. Def Leppard, Pyromania. My mother had it on vinyl. I remember listening to this when it came out. Huge album in 1983, Not going to spend much time on that either. I actually did a review for that earlier in the year. Another early one, I could have picked Blizzard of Oz or Diary of a Madman, but I went with Diary of a Madman. Just a killer album. Even to this day, it's still very enjoyable. Like a lot of these I'm shown, I still play every once in a while. Not very often these days, but it's a part of my history and my youth. Okay, another one. Since I no longer have Stay Hungry or You Can't Stop Rock and Roll anymore, I picked Under the Blade. I got it on vinyl too, but I just broke out the cassette. Twisted Sister was a huge part of my childhood. Dee Snider to me was the coolest human being on the planet at freaking 4 or 5, 6 years old when I first saw Dee Snider on MTV around 1983-ish. And, obviously seeing Dee Snider in Pee-wee's Big Adventure as a kid, come on, man, that's the coolest damn thing in the world when you're a fucking little 5, 6-year-old kid, 7-year-old kid, So, ironically, I first heard this band through wrestling because the tag team, the Road Warriors, came to the ring to this. Talking about Black Sabbath with Paranoid. And obviously the track is Iron Man. So this definitely identifies me as a young little kid getting exposed to hard rock, heavy metal. Another one I don't listen to much anymore. Besides Electric Funeral and Hand of Doom, I still absolutely adore those tracks. And Electric Funeral was actually the first thing I ever learned on guitar. A long, long time ago, over 30 years ago. Of course, another one from my childhood, the Scorpions. Love at First Sting would have been my first Scorpions album, but I still went back Blackout because I did know the song. I did know the songs No One Like You, Pertainly. So yeah, man, Scorpions have been there. A huge influence on me as a guitar player too. So that's that for like the early part of my life. So now we're going to go into... this one's a little mixed up because this is kind of like other things that I could identify with too. Rainbow Rising, probably the birth of power metal, if we're being honest. One of the greatest 70s heavy metal albums of all time, in my opinion. The late Ronnie James Dio, Jimmy Bain, Cozy Powell's freaking double bass drumming on this. Come on, Stargazer, White in the Black, Turret Woman. What killer tracks, man. So that's one. All right, so then more Black Sabbath, Heaven and Hell. Now, ironically, I did not hear this till 1998 because somebody ignorantly blinded me and said, Will, the Aussie Black Sabbath's the only real Black Sabbath. You don't want to hear this stuff. Well, when I fucking first heard it, I was blown away. So to that person, ha! That's all I got to say about that. And you're the one missing out on cool music if you still to this day don't acknowledge albums like Heaven and Hell and the Mob Rules and everything else that came after that does not have Ozzy Osbourne on vocals. Well, man, a little trip into the dark side here with some Merciful Fate. Another huge influence on me as a guitar player. Denner and Sherman, what a freaking duo, man. Some of the best guitar riffs still in heavy metal history in my book. So yes, a Merciful Fate in the beginning. Can't remember exactly what the first Merciful Fate album was I heard. I think it was Melissa, but I felt like pulling out In the Beginning because I just absolutely love it. First King Diamond album I ever heard. This must have been around, I want to say 88, 89. Fatal Portrait. Still a killer album. You know, could have easily been the third Merciful Fate album. You know, in fact, Dressed in White was the very first King Diamond song I ever heard, and the freaking guitar solo in that blew me away by Andy LaRocque. So that's one. And this one definitely blew me away when I first heard it. First Accept album I ever heard, Restless and Wild. And the first Accept song I ever heard was Restless and Wild. Blew me away, man. First time I freaking heard it. I just love that galloping guitar ripped, you know, the energy behind it. Just killer stuff. And come on, Fast as a Shark, man. Just full blown early freaking speed metal, thrash metal, you know. Now, this one that I'm going to show now is the one that got me into Judas Priest. Talking about Painkiller. I knew who Judas Priest was. Didn't know everything. I knew the obvious songs like Living After Midnight, You Got Another Thing Coming, Breaking the Law. But this is the album that got me hooked on Judas Priest and made me want to hear the whole back catalog back around 1990. This freaking album blew me away when I first heard Painkiller. And to me, it's still the best Judas Priest album. I know a lot of people would not agree with that, but hey. Okay, well, this one isn't particularly the first Iron Maiden album I ever heard, but, man, I went with the self-titled debut. It's my favorite Maiden album. Yes, technically, Peace of Mind was the first one I ever had. Or, I'm sorry, the first one I ever heard. Somewhere in Time was the first one I ever had. But to me, I identify with the Di'Anno era Iron Maiden more. You know, that's just me. I love those first two albums the best. And moving on, of course, Motorhead. First time I heard Motorhead, man, I was just freaking floored. Just, come on, it's freaking Lemmy, man. Fast Eddie Clarke, you know. Filthy Phil Taylor, man. One of the first bands to really go extreme with the double bass, too. You know, early on. But Ace of Spades, man, heck yeah. Moving on. Okay, so I first heard this band. Obviously, I first heard Metallica covering these songs by Diamond Head before I heard Diamond Head. So I went with Lightning to the Nation. Yeah, we're kind of showing some new wave of British heavy metal stuff right now that I'm really into. Killer album. You can definitely tell where that influence came from when it comes to what would become thrash metal with Metallica, you know, and bands like that. Okay, so moving on. Another one I absolutely adore, Angel Witch. What a killer, killer, killer album this is. Just classic new wave of British heavy metal, man. And I first heard the name Angel Witch on the Cliff 'Em All DVD. VHS, I should say, because I first saw the VHS before ever seeing it on DVD way back in, I think it was 1989 or 90. I first saw Cliff 'Em All, and that's where I first heard the name Angel Witch mentioned by Dave Mustaine in that video. And it had me curious. Another one that Metallica has covered on their Garage Days EP, the band Holocaust with the Nightcomers. What a killer new wave of British heavy metal album this is. So yeah, these are definitely ones I definitely identify with when it comes to me getting into the new wave of British heavy metal. Okay, so moving on. What do we got here? Sweet Savage with Killing Time. Now, this didn't come out till 1996. You know, now, the original version of Killing Time had Vivian Campbell on guitars, who would go on to Dio and Def Leppard, obviously, and The Last in Line. So, yeah, this one right here, definitely a huge impact on me, too, as a guitar player. The original demos are pretty cool, actually. I wish those would get reissued. Anyways, moving on. Another one when it comes to the new wave of British heavy metal, Savage, with their 1983 album, Loose and Lethal. Just raw, old school, new wave of British heavy metal that kicks your freaking ass, man. Some cool rips on here. In fact, Let It Loose was covered by Metallica too early on. So that connection to Metallica is obviously there. What Metallica would turn into. All right, so now we're moving on to some American power metal. Well, not quite. We got one American power metal. Then we got another new wave of British heavy metal band. Sabotage, Hall of the Mountain King. Killer album. 24 Hours Ago was the very first Sabotage song I ever heard way back in 1988 as a young kid. I was completely floored by the guitar playing on it by Chris Oliva and the awesome vocals of John Oliva. Classic American power metal right there. And I probably should have thrown some more American power metal in here. I realized I did not. Like I said, man, I could have picked probably over 100 freaking CDs here. But anyways, moving on. I don't have the 3 albums, but I do have this Best of Grim Reaper. It's just got songs from the first 3 albums on it. See You in Hell was the very first Grim Reaper album I ever heard. Around I was a little late to this one. I didn't hear Grim Reaper till probably 1994, actually. And I was just floored how freaking awesome it was. I mean, yeah, cheesy, but they had some really, really awesome guitar work and some cool new wave of British heavy metal riffs. Okay, now we're getting into the thrash. Technically, what would have been part 2 of me really getting into metal. So I kind of skipped a little bit here. Obvious one, the first band I ever heard when it comes to thrash metal, Metallica. I could have shown Master of Puppets, but Ride the Lightning has resonated with me a lot more over the years. Even though I love Master of Puppets, don't get me wrong, and I love Kill 'Em All. Still my favorite Metallica album. Don't gonna talk about it much. That would have been the second Metallica album I ever heard, pretty much in a row, because I heard Master of Puppets, then my friend played me Ride the Lightning that same day, and I was like floored. Exodus, Fabulous Disaster. I remember hearing this when it first came out in 1989. Like Father Like Son was the first Exodus song I ever heard, and I was freaking blown away by the heaviness, and the cool rips, Okay, another one I heard is a new release in 1989. I remember an older friend that got me into this music bought this when it first came out. I only have it on cassette, though. Testament, Practice What You Preach. A lot of people called this a cheap Metallica. Whatever. Alex Skolnick, well, come on, man. One of the greatest thrash metal lead guitarists. So yeah, this one, easily the first Testament album I ever heard, and I still think it's pretty cool. It's not my favorite these days, but you know what? It's still a pretty enjoyable album for what it is. Come on, man. Gotta have some Anthrax from Among the Living. Man, when I first heard this, I was blown away, dude. I just loved the energy of it. To me, this had more of a roller, definitely that New York hardcore. Yeah, a little bit of New York hardcore mixed in here with the thrash. This is Anthrax definitely going in more of that thrash metal, full throttle direction, kind of like what SOD was doing prior. Caught in a Mosh, man. Indians, or Among the Living. Come on, man. Skeletons in the Closet. Just a killer album, man. Okay, moving on. Another one I remember hearing when it first came out in 1990. Suicidal Tendencies, Lights, Camera, Revolution, man. Freaking love this album. In fact, to this day, I still put this on and listen to it, man. I freaking adore it. It's one of my favorite albums from that period. Just good stuff, man. Okay, moving on. More thrash. Not going to spend much time on this because I feel like I've talked about this one a lot. Megadeth's Rust in Peace. Quintessentially the greatest thrash metal album of all time. Definitely the most technical, very well crafted songwriting on here, and just great guitar solos by Marty Friedman and Dave Mustaine on here. And excellent drumming by the late Nick Menza. And Dave Ellefson does a damn good job on there too. Okay, so this would have been the first Slayer album I ever heard. In fact, I remember doing a trade in school with a kid that I used to go to school with. We had, let's see, he had Slayer's Seasons in the Abyss on cassette tape, and I had Ozzy's No Rest for the Wicked. I wanted something faster. So I traded my No Rest for the Wicked cassette tape for his Seasons in the Abyss cassette tape. No longer happened, unfortunately, but Seasons in the Abyss by Slayer is the first full Slayer album I ever heard. Still a killer album all these years later. Probably Kerry King and Jeff Hanneman's best lead guitar work on a Slayer album. Debatable. Really good stuff, though. Just an excellent Slayer album. Now, Evil Has No Boundaries was the very first Slayer song I actually ever heard in 1988 on a thrash metal compilation cassette tape. But Seasons was the first one I actually ever heard. Moving on. Another band I remember hearing when they first came out in 1990. I was pretty floored by the guitar player of this band, too. Band gets a lot of freaking hate nowadays, unfortunately, but Pantera's Cowboys from Hell. Yeah, man. 33 years of this album, CD, this release has lived with me. Dimebag's guitar tone on here is just freaking crushing, dude. And it would get just more crushing on the next couple of albums. But I like this one because Philip Anselmo is still using that high register vocal style that he used on the previous album, Power Metal. So yeah, this one definitely has a special place in Metal Ben's heart. You know, and this is my teenage years, I guess you could say, as being a metalhead. I mean, The Years of Decay was the first Overkill album I actually heard, but, you know, I went with the second one I actually heard, which was Horoscope. Came out in 1991. Killer album. Excellent production, you know, produced by Terry Date. I'm pretty sure this is produced by Terry Date also. Anyway, killer album. Great production. Punchy guitars. You know, first album without Bobby Gustafsson. But man, Merritt Grant, and I cannot remember the other guitar player's name off the top of my head. Either way, it's a killer album. So that one I definitely identify with. Probably the Overkill album I listened to the most. Moving on. Another one I remember hearing for the first time around 94. Yeah, I was a little late, a couple years late to this one. Alice in Hell by Annihilator. First time I heard this, I was freaking blown away by the guitar playing on this. Jeff Waters, definitely one of the best thrash metal guitar players, one of the cleanest guitar players, too. Epic stuff, man. Not going to spend much time talking about these because anybody that's into thrash knows these albums. Another one. First heard this around 90. I was a little late to this band, too. I didn't hear Creator till probably 96. I bought Como of Souls on cassette tape at a drip store of all places for $1. But Como of Souls. I mean, by today's standards, not my favorite Creator album, but back then I really enjoyed this. It's still a damn good album. You know, People of the Lie, just a killer track, you know. So yeah, this would have been probably my first taste of German thrash metal. But yeah, killer album. Moving on, holy crap, man. Still got a bit to show. Now, I was really into this band. And yeah, I call it a band because it technically was a band. I'm talking about Danzig. How the Gods Kill, first one I ever heard, around 93. Definitely identify with this. I absolutely love this album. Dirty Black Summer, Godless, you know, there's a lot of killer tracks on here, man. But yeah, I remember seeing the video to How the Gods Kill on Headbangers Ball, and I was just freaking hooked at the time. I just liked the dark atmosphere to it, you know. And back then I didn't really know much about Glenn Danzig, so I had no clue he was even the vocalist of the Misfits. I didn't know much about the Misfits back then either. Okay, now we're going into some different territory here. This is what got me into wanting to be a lead guitar player. Now, a lot of this stuff I'm showing made me want to pick up a guitar. I should have mentioned that too. But this right here made me want to play lead guitar. I was just floored when I first heard Yngwie Malmsteen. And I'm pretty sure this is the first one I ever heard. His collection compilation, which came out around 92. First studio album I ever bought was Marching Out, and I was just floored by that album. You know, so yeah, Yngwie Malmsteen. I do have a lot of his albums. Don't have everything. I have a good bit, though. Okay, so moving on. Okay, I was a little late to 70s Scorpions, too. So yeah, Scorpions get showed twice here for reason. Okay. So it would have been 1998. I remember my friend and I went to a record shop, and he picked up the Scorpions cassette tape called Hot and Heavy. It had some tracks from this album on it. Talk about Taken by Force, my favorite 70s Ole John Roth era Scorpions album. This right here definitely made me want to even play lead guitar even more after hearing Ole John Roth's playing. Just freaking fell in love with his guitar playing. 70s Scorpions is still my favorite, you know. Moving on. Okay, now we're getting into some power metal territory here. Okay, so I first saw this band in 1997, actually, but I didn't hear them till 1999, but I was always curious. And this was the first one I ever saw in 97. Got this shortly after I got Burnt Offerings in 1999. Great compilation of the first two Iced Earth albums and the Enter the Realm demo, re-recorded with Matthew Barlow on vocals. Killer stuff, man. Definitely made me a huge Iced Earth fan. Not this one particularly, Burnt Offerings did, but you know what? I'm showing this one because this is the first one I saw in a Hit Parader magazine for a Century Media Records advertisement at the time. And that would have been in 97. Okay, so I remember there was a Metal Edge magazine that had a little article on German power metal or European power metal, and I got really curious. So I picked up a Stratovarius CD around that time, and I was completely blown away. Definitely has that Yngwie Malmsteen type of feel to it, mixed with the Halloween type of vibe. Just excellent stuff, man. Timo Tolkki, what a great guitar player, man. So yeah, that's like one of the early ones. I always loved his sound too. You know, like to me, he has a way better sound than Yngwie Malmsteen does. Moving on, another one I found early on too, Blind Guardian. Battalions of Fear back in the 90s, this stuff was very hard to find. Around the late 90s, you started to see this stuff sold in the record stores. Not the first one I got. The first one I got was Somewhere Far Beyond, I believe. I'm pretty sure that was the first one I got, but this one right here is probably my favorite still. I just like the raw energy of this, the speed of it. So yeah, if you like early Walls of Jericho Halloween, early Blind Guardian is definitely for you. Moving on, because this video is getting quite long. Now, I knew of Halloween, obviously, but the first one I heard was Keeper of the Seven Keys 1 and 2. I did hear songs off this one on a live EP called I Want Out around 89-ish, but I didn't hear Walls of Jericho till 90, I want to say 99. So I went out and got Walls of Jericho. This is not the copy I bought originally. This is actually a reissue from, sometime in, I can't remember exactly when these reissues came out. I was freaking blown away by the track Ride the Sky. Ride the Sky to me is one of the best speed metal songs ever, man. So yeah, that's Halloween when they were basically raw speed metal. You know, moving on. Got some Gamma Ray. Land of the Free. Now, Power Plant was the very first Gamma Ray album I ever heard and bought way back in 1999. I couldn't believe the playing on that, you know. like for the longest time, I had no clue like these bands existed after Halloween, obviously, and Kai Hansen being from Halloween. Well, back in Halloween now as we speak. Man, so I went up, after I got Power Plant, I went out and got all the Gamma Ray CDs I could find at the time. Land of the Free Man could easily be Keeper of the Seven Keys Part 3. It's freaking amazing. So that definitely identifies with me getting into power metal. Okay, so you know what? I got a couple black metal ones here too. Like I think back to this period of my life, this was a really interesting time for me because this is when I was really starting to branch out and get into the underground, you know, like big time. Thanks to magazines like Metal Maniac magazines, you know. So I know this band gets a lot of shit nowadays. I'm particularly not a big fan of this band anymore, but I still love this album. Dimmu Borgir's Spiritual Black Dimension. This is the only Dimmu album I pretty much listen to, maybe For All Tid sometimes. The other albums I don't play much at all anymore. Even though Pure Eutanica was the first one I ever bought back in 2001 as a new release, I went back and bought this one not too long after. I was freaking floored, man. This one is still a damn good black metal album, in my opinion. Anyways, moving on. So Immortal is next. I came across Immortal around 1999. I was really curious about them. Sons of Northern Darkness is the first one I actually ever bought. A Pure Holocaust is easily my favorite. Just epic stuff, man. Just raw, primitive black metal at its best. Okay, moving on. Now, this was the first black metal CD I ever bought, and I bought this in 1999, roughly around the time this came out. Another album that gets a lot of shit, but I think it's a great album. 9 Equilibrium by Emperor. This thing is good, man. I think it's as good as the first two. It's still got that majestic sound. Yeah, it still has that majestic sound to it. And that very cool atmosphere. Just really good stuff, in my opinion. I think people definitely should revisit that album. Okay, moving on. So now we're going to get into, what do we got here? Got a little bit of death metal here. A couple Christian metal ones, too. So, kind of got exposed to Christian metal in the early 90s. I was just curious about it. And the one that made me curious was Deliberate. I have this on CD too, but the CD is a very cheap looking copy. I need to get a better copy of this on CD, but I have the cassette. First Deliberate CD, or cassette tape, excuse me. But the first one I heard was Weapons of Our Warfare. But this one is just as freaking good, man. To me, it's like a Christian metal version of Metallica with a vocalist that sounds like he fronts Queensryche. That's kind of the vibe you get. A lot of really, really cool Mesa Boogie sounding thrashy riffs, you know. So yeah. So then we got some Living Sacrifice with Inhabit. A very, very dark album. Some great Christian death metal. Their last death metal album before they would go into more of a hardcore metalcore direction. But this album is very good. I think it is. Just some great death metal. Okay, so moving on. Okay. Another one that I was really into, and I first heard this in 93. And they were from Pennsylvania, so I was like, that's even cooler. Believer, Sam the Obscured. Bought it on cassette tape in 93 for $1 at a Christian bookstore that I used to live near. What a killer album. Some excellent riffage on here. Some great progressive passages. And this is one of the first albums I can remember listening to that actually has like Yeah, like Violence. It kind of has like a symphonic metal vibe to it on the track Dies I Raise, you know. So yeah, really, really good stuff. And Believer definitely does not get credit for probably being pioneers of symphonic metal in a way. Anyways, moving on. Okay, so now we're going to get into the death metal stuff here. Death Symbolic. First death album release I ever bought. I had it on cassette tape way back in '95. I got it as a new release. So yeah, man, still a really cool album. Man, it's hard to tell if this would be my favorite death album nowadays, but man, I still really enjoy this. It's definitely a very progressive type of album. You know, it's Chuck definitely strayed away from death metal. You know, which you could say probably started around the album Human, but you know, Symbolic definitely takes it to a whole new level. You know. Okay, so moving on. Let me grab a drink quick here. The video is turning out longer than I wanted it to be, but hey, it is what it is. Obituary, Cause of Death. First heard Obituary, oh man, what did I'd say around 94. The Incomplete was actually the first one I heard. Then World Demise. So Cause of Death did come then. But man, this, what can I say, man? It's a masterpiece when it comes to death metal. Don't gotta talk much more about it, you know. Now this one, let me talk about this one. This is the one that got me into like super brutal technical death metal at the time. And I bought this as a new release in 2000. I remember reading about these guys in Metal Maniac magazine and being very curious because just the Egyptian vibe had me very curious on what this would sound like. Nile, Black Seeds of Vengeance. What a killer album, man. I was just floored that a band could play that fast. Like, this definitely took death metal to a whole new level at the time. When it came out in 2000 to me, and just the Egyptian atmosphere to it, you know. Oh my God, still a killer album. Okay, a controversial one here. I know a lot of people would not pick this one, but for some reason, this Morbid Angel album stands out to me. Gateways to Annihilation, probably the most underrated Morbid Angel album. Man, when I first bought this back in 2000, I played the heck out of it. Ageless Still I Am is probably my favorite Morbid Angel song. I just love this album, man. I love the atmosphere of it. Some excellent riffs on here. Trey does some excellent guitar solos on here too. Just great stuff. Okay, moving on because I'm starting to get a bit tired here. Okay. Sepultura now. Rise would have been the first Sepultura album I ever heard. Schizophrenia was actually the second one I heard. And my favorite when it comes to Sepultura. I just love this. I love the primitive, raw sound of this. You know? And it's definitely a step up, you know. It's definitely a step up from Morbid Visions, I guess you would say, and Bestial Devastation. And first one that had Andreas Kisser on guitars. What a killer album, man. I still play the heck out of this at times. Okay, now we got a couple more to end this. So these are the two bands that I can remember really got me into melodic death metal around 1999, 2000. Now, I remember seeing the album cover to this probably around 97. The Jester Race by In Flames. Probably still their best album. It's sad where this band would go. But man, this is a good one. Really great melodic. Iron Maiden like twin guitars on here, you know. Just really good stuff. Now, Clayman would have been the first one I heard, but I just wanted to show this one because of this is the one I listen to the most if I'm ever in the mood for In Flames. And last but not least, another band early on that had some really good albums, and then after a while they kind of, I don't know, their albums just got kind of mediocre, I guess. And Samey, Children of Bodom, I picked Something Wild, even though Hatebreeder was the first one I ever got. Something Wild, the first album, is still my favorite. And man, we just hit the 40-minute mark, so that's it for this video. Anyways, subscribe to Rick's channel, The Dreadful Minutes. Definitely go sub to his channel. Man, I hope that's not too much to take in. Anyways, guys, keep it freaking metal, keep it real, and stay tuned for more.